I feel like I spend a lot of time talking to people who have given up on faith. Let me rephrase that. Have given up on the church, not faith. They're the old phrase that we've often repeated, spiritual but not religious. You remember that phrase that we've used over the past about 2 decades? In fact, this group is known as the Dones. They're done with the institution, the human creation of church. It's that book that I think I've shared before. I love Jesus, but I don't like the church. They still love Jesus. They still long for spiritual connection. And the question I come back to is why? The answer continues to be this deep sense of religious hypocrisy, judgmentalism, exclusion. I often say you come to church to feel better. If you already feel bad about yourself, you don't want to come and feel worse. And so here we have this parable. I love this parable because it reminds us that our jobs are to not look at other sins or mistakes or behaviors, but to take a hard look at our own lives. So we go back to these 2 questions. Which one are you more like? Now, I want to say to you, if the first thing you say is, "Oh, I know, I know that person down the street. Oh, they're the tax collector." You start thinking about everybody else. That's what we do. We have a little too much of Pharisees in us these days. It's so easy to judge other people. And what this parable calls for all of us, this is my own sermon to myself. What this parable calls for is humility. It's this reminder, this major theme throughout the Bible, this major theme throughout Luke. Do you remember the Last Supper? The disciples have traveled with Jesus. They have seen Jesus heal and teach and offer mercy and preach and love. And even then, at the Last Supper, they're huddled. There's a group of them huddled in the corner, and what are they doing? They're arguing over who is the greatest. See, humility, it applies to every part of our life, of partnerships, of families, of friendships, of work life, whatever it may be. I have a quote. I love this definition of humility in one of my leadership books that I've read. It says, humility, humble leaders, those who practice humility, have a clear understanding of who they are, what they bring to the table, and the areas that present growth opportunities. They're not trying to act like they have no flaws or weaknesses, but this allows them to be more authentic in a leadership role. Tim Keller, who is a Presbyterian, retired Presbyterian pastor, talks about humility in this way, and he refers to a particular book. It's actually a dissertation. It was written by Jonathan Edwards many, many years ago, and the book is called The Nature of True Virtue, and Tim Keller refers to sort of this juxtaposition of moral reformation and spiritual transformation. He distinguishes in this book, Jonathan Edwards distinguishes in his dissertation between common virtue and true virtue. He says, for common virtue, the deepest habits of the heart are restrained to make one more honest and kind and true. The deepest habits of the heart are restrained. But he says in true virtue, the deepest habits of the heart are changed to make you more generous and kind and honest. And common virtue, he says you sort of jury rig the heart, if you will. You take fear and pride and you make a person, you sort of force honesty out of that fear and pride. But in true virtue, the fear and the pride of the heart are dissolved. They are disintegrated at the root. He goes on to say moral reformation looks at the rules. Spiritual transformation looks at the ruler. And see, that's the beauty of a spiritual life. That's the beauty of looking at the stories of Jesus. They tell us the character of Jesus. And when we look at the character of Jesus and his love and his grace and his mercy and his faith and his healing, it changes our hearts. It shapes us and it molds us into his likeness. And that's when humility happens. Authenticity begins to take place. Mother Teresa talks often about humility. In fact, she came up with an entire list of rules of how to live a humble life. I'm not going to share them with you today, but there's a quote, and she said, "It is in being humble that our love becomes real. If you are humble, nothing will touch you, neither praise nor disgrace, because you know what it is in being humble that our love is real. If you are blamed, you will not be discouraged. If they call you a saint, you will not put yourself on a pedestal." This parable is one of humility. And we ask ourselves, where are we? And we're probably a little bit of both. Where we say, I'm not like that tax collector down there. And yet that tax collector is saying, have mercy on me, God. And so we're challenged today to be people of humility. I want to share with you a second parable this morning, and it's a parable I love. It's the parable of the prodigal son. The word prodigal means wasteful and extravagant. So whichever child was asking that, whichever grandparent or parent, make sure you pass that along. You can let them know. But this parable is a wonderful parable to continue to look at these questions and ask, who am I and what is it that we're supposed to learn in this parable? And we start in the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, and it tells us the context of what is going on in this parable. And so we hear that it says, now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, this fellow continues to welcome sinners and eat with them. And so we once again see those who are on the outside saying, what is he doing? Why is he continuing to break the rules? And so Jesus says, let me tell you a story. He says that he says in verses 11 through 13, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that belongs to me. So he divided the property among them and gave it to him. That's a big deal if you think about it, because you have this older brother who's been faithful, and he stays and he's doing the work for his father, and he's responsible, and he's not going to go and squander his wealth on a trip. And then you have this younger who has the audacity to go and ask his father for his inheritance as a teenager. You have to think about that. As Tricia said, that seems hard to imagine, because what if the father needs it down that you must be the older child. No, you're the youngest, but what if the father needs it down the way? And why would the younger brother be so selfish is the question that we're asking. The word prodigal means wasteful and extravagant, as I said. So you have this younger child, and he was wasteful with what he has. The story goes on. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had, and he travels off to the distant country where he squandered his property on bad living, on dissolute living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. When he was in need, he needed to find a job. And so he went and hired himself out to the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pig slop, the pods that the pigs were eating, because no one had given him any food. You have to think about this in the context of those hearing it in first century culture. One of the lowest jobs that a person could ever take would be the job to feed the pigs, because for Jews, swines are unclean animals. And so he was so hungry, not only was he willing to feed the pigs, he was willing to eat the pig slop that was put in front of the pigs. Often in the world of addiction, or when we talk about those who are struggling, we talk about this being hitting rock bottom. And in that moment, he realizes what a mess he had made of his life. Let's listen to what happens next. When he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I think I will get up and I will go home and I will say to my father, 'Father, I have sinned. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like your hired hand.'" So here the youngest son swallows his pride, and he goes back to his father. One of the hardest things, I think, for anyone, to ask for help. Which one do you see yourself in today? Have you ever hit rock bottom and been desperate? Not only to be fed physically, but spiritually as well. This is the best part of the story. In the 20th verse, he sets off to go see his father, and while he's still far off, it says, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and he put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father says, "Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He is lost, and now he's found." It's time to celebrate. Can you imagine, as Jesus is telling the story, think about those gathered close to him who have pressed up against Jesus, who are listening with bated breath, those who are sinners in the crowd, who have made mistakes, who have been considered outcasts, outlaws, forgotten. Jesus is saying, you, no matter what your story is, no matter what has happened, if you've hit rock bottom, no matter what your mistakes, you are beloved. You are beloved. Well, that's not the end of the story. Do you see yourself in the older son? Anyone? Ethan's, my oldest, is like, amen. Those younger squandering things away. See, here's the thing. He's resentful in this moment. He says to his father, "I'm not going in there. I'm not going to go in and celebrate that scumbag." He doesn't say that. I just like to say that word. He says, and you know what, Father, you haven't even done anything for me. And I've been here my whole life. I've been responsible. I've been faithful. Can you hear it? Anyone, have you said this before? I'm the one who does right. And the Father says, everything I have, son, belongs to you. All that I have left is yours. But your brother was as good as dead, and he's alive again. What a gift to celebrate. Back to my story about the Duns, the ones who say, I've had it with the institution. Because, see, so often as followers of Jesus, we act like this is this exclusive club in here. But in the reality, Jesus wants us to come inside this space to be reminded that we are always welcomed home. No matter what our stories are, whether you've done everything right, you follow the rules, you're faithful, or whether you have squandered it away and hit rock bottom. It's like that old spiritual, softly and tenderly. Jesus is calling you sinners, come home. This is a place where all of us are beloved. It doesn't matter any of the things that we like to categorize to God. God sees us as God's beloved. I was thinking of a story that spoke to me as I was thinking of this prodigal son. When I was appointed to a church in Boise, Idaho, it was a large United Methodist church, and I was an associate, and there was a young woman, her name was Brandy, that I had befriended, and she eventually joined a Bible study that I was in, and she shared with me one day in that Bible study that she was a stripper. And throughout the year, she would say, I really want to leave the industry, and I want to choose to have a different path and a different life. And so finally, she made the decision that she was going to leave that industry and go back to school. So she invited me to come to her last day stripping. Imagine my surprise as I'm sitting in the back of this strip club, and she's stripping on a pole, and she stops and says, hey, everybody, there's my pastor. Kid you not. I was like, hi, here I am. But there was this woman who walked in the door. And over to the side, as she walked in, a group of strippers came and hugged her and called her Mama. Hi, Mama. And they were excited. And I was so taken as I watched this interaction of love and grace and mercy. And she was taking things out and handing it to them and hugging, and she left. And afterwards, as Brandy and I were leaving, I said, who was that woman who came? And she said, oh, that's Mama. See, Mama was a stripper once, and she cleaned up her life, and she has devoted her life to helping women leave the industry safely, and she provides housing. She had a house that she turned into each room she would allow women to live in, and would work with them to help them move back and to find work and to go back to school and have these lives of wholeness and love and mercy and grace. And she said, let me introduce you to her. She's still here. She usually goes around back. And so I went and I asked her, you tell me a little bit about your story. And she said, well, I was a stripper and I was an addict. I didn't think I was worth anything. And then I heard these words about this man named Jesus. She said, my life was forever changed. And she said, so all I want to do through my actions is to help each woman here know their worth, their value, how deeply they're loved. And so I come each night. Sometimes I give them clothing. Sometimes I give them different things. And I just want them to know that they're loved. I don't know your story. I don't know the dark places you might have been. But I do know this. Whether you're the prodigal and you say, I've done everything right, or you're the younger brother and you say, my life is a mess, God's love is real. And God's love reminds you and me that you are beloved. And so I invite you today to ask yourself, where am I in these stories, and how can I respond? Amen.